I have a brief introduction of our first speaker, first in Farsi, then in English. Then I'm going to ask her to share her slides and great presentation with us. Our first speaker today is Dr. Sharon Moran. سخنران اول امروز ما خانم پروفسور شارن مرن هستن. دکتر شارن مرن دانشیار دانشکده علوم محیط زیست و جنگلداری دانشگاه ایالتی نیویورک هستند. با پیشینه علمی در علم شیمی و علوم سیاسی و سیاست عمومی مدرک دکترای خودشون رو در رشته جغرافیا دریافت کردند. علاقه پژوهشیشون در زمینه اکولوژی سیاسی، رابطه محیط زیست، جامعه، فناوری‌های سبز و نوآورانه است. در زمینه سرمایه‌گذاری پایدار، ابعاد انسانی، مسائل مرتبط با آب، خط و مقررات مرتبط با این موضوع هم تحقیقاتی رو انجام دادن. دکتر مرند راهنمایی پایان‌نامه‌های کارشناسی ارشد و دکترای دانشجویان متعددی رو بر عهده داشتند و مقالات علمیشون رو به صورت گسترده در اختیار متخصصان این حوزه قرار دادن. موضوع اصلی مطالعه اخیرشون در حوزه آب و عدالت محیط زیستی بوده. به ویژه کتابی اخیراً منتشر کردن تحت عنوان احیای جوامع حاشیه آبراهای شهری که در سال 2018 به صورت مشترک با دو تا نویسنده دیگه منتشر کردن. عنوان سخنرانی دکتر مرن در رویداد امروز درخت زندگی آبراهی‌های شهری، احیای رودخانه‌ها و عدالت محیط زیستی. بعد از معرفیشون به زبان انگلیسی ازشون خواهش میکنم که سخنرانی خودشون رو ارائه بکنن. Our first speaker today is Professor Sharon Moran. Dr. Sharon D. Moran is Associate Professor at the State University of New York SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. With backgrounds in chemistry and political science and public policy, she obtained her PhD in geography in 2000. Her research interests include political ecology, environment society relations, green and innovative technology, sustainable enterprise, human dimensions of water or wastewater issues, and policy and regulation. Dr. Moran has supervised many master's degree and PhD students and her scientific papers have been widely published. Water and environmental justice has been the main focus of her recent publications. Particularly in 2018, she co-authored a book called Revitalizing Urban Water Communities, Streams of Environmental Justice. The title of Sharon's presentation is Urban Waterways, Stream Restoration and Environmental Justice. Sharon, please.
Thank you. It's an honor to be invited here and to have listeners on multiple continents. I'm sorry we're doing this virtually, but maybe it's the only way. And someday I do hope to visit you in Tehran, and I certainly want to behold canals, one of the most amazing things I've ever heard of with water. So the title of my talk is Urban Waterways, Stream Restoration and Environmental Justice. Cities are where people are, so a great thing about urban waterways is that they can and will have contact with people. Yet, from the perspective of environmental justice, urban waterways manifest problems, and this just underscores my country's ongoing struggles with issues around structural racism. People who are members of marginalized communities, including African Americans, indigenous people, and the poor, are routinely burdened with more in terms of pollution and environmental bads, and also receive less in terms of green space amenities and environmental goods. Like most places in the world, we struggle to carry out development in a way that could even begin to earn the designation sustainable development. And yet, despite the growing array of methods for naturalizing the built environment, we see repeatedly that scientism, economism, and the values of the marketplace eclipse everything else. And this image is the Boston Fens, one of the most impressive greenways in an urban area in the US. And the person is Robert Bullard, who is really referred to as the father of environmental justice in the US. So my talk will take place in a few different phases, but first I'm going to ask you to think about watersheds. So we all see them in the built environment that we live in. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine, how does the water cycle work? Okay, the rain falls down and then it comes back as precipitation. Okay, you have the picture. Something from a science class, maybe? Perhaps it looks something like this. You can open your eyes now. So it's the cycle with condensation, the sun driving it, evaporation, infiltration to the groundwater. What's wrong with this picture? It's how we all think, but what it doesn't pay attention to is the ways cities use water. This map shows the Syracuse landscape. The Finger Lakes are down the lower left side, and you see Syracuse right there at the center. Syracuse gets its water from Onondaga Lake, which is just about 25 miles to the south. The water is piped, and the system has been in place since the 19th century. Syracuse had as many as 250,000 residents at its peak, and the population has now decreased. But what happens to that water? It's discharged through a wastewater treatment plant that looks something like this. It's located on the shores of Onondaga Lake. So it's fair to say that this is our relationship to the landscape. A lake that we drink from, a lake that we flush into. And yet, do people understand it this way or appreciate it? Despite the fact that water and sewer makes up the second largest share of budgets in most communities after schools. This kind of flow is not well understood or appreciated. And a typical person, kids, adults, they understand the material flows in the household and the economy even better than water, familiar with how things come to the home, where they go to, and the system for handling them on into the future. So in short, there's very minimal understanding of how urban sheds work and what they do for us. Next, I want to talk about urban streams and greenways. There are exceptional projects like the one I mentioned. Olmsted, what a wizard, what a set of wonderful ideas. And yet, so many opportunities continue to be lost for urban nature and urban waterways. The Fabos Conference happens every 3 years. It's run by landscape architects at the University of Massachusetts. And Dr. Fabos is the progenitor of this program, and the next will occur in 2 years. So this has been tracked in a very complete way, but yet, what about opportunities? So this is a picture of one of the largest shopping malls in the US. It was expanded just about 7 years ago. This picture is at an oblique angle, and it shows the mall's location right next to Onondaga Lake, which you just saw a picture of. And it's quite busy. Look at all the cars in the parking lot. But right next to it is Onondaga Creek, which still maintains a moderately healthy ecosystem in some locations. And there's even some bald eagles that have now come back to nesting in this area. And yet, you see the drain. So this is the parking lot structure. Look at these ways of developing that have gone on here. Look at the absolutely incarcerated appearance of the water in this structure. So did it have to be like that? Was it necessary in some way? Couldn't something better have been done with this particular design? I think what we see in our landscape is that while there are exceptional projects out there, there are many opportunities that go unrealized. So next, I'd like to talk about stream restoration and equity. Environmental justice really grew up in the US in the late 80s and early 90s. And it came about as a result of lots and lots of problems that revealed the fact that the built environment so marginalizes some populations relative to others. It's the legacy of segregation in the US and ongoing issues with racism built into policies from political down to day-to-day practical implementation. So the concept of environmental justice is that there can and should be better involvement of people of all races and classes relative to the implementation and enforcement of environmental laws and policies. So our key environmental agency has committed to this as a goal. And even though this quote dates from 2017, the commitment goes back 20 or 30 years for the US EPA. So this is not completely new. In revitalizing urban waterways in particular, it's important that when this happens, environmental equity gets advanced and not reversed. And the issue there would be gentrification, that as a community improves its overall relationship to waterways, that it could create a system where the apartments, the commercial enterprise all really prices out people who are lower income. So I was curious about how stream restoration projects were going forward in the US and whether they were making any special effort to attend to the goals of environmental justice. So I got data on the projects that had been done in one state, and I plotted them against where people lived. So what you'll see is the urban locations, for example, Philadelphia in the lower right-hand corner, Pittsburgh over towards the left. These are the higher density population, and the more rural areas, this is where we're seeing more stream restoration. Now, at some level, that makes sense. Mile for mile, that's where the streams are located. And yet, the irony is the number of people who are able to enjoy the benefits of stream restoration when it is exclusively in rural areas is that it undermines the concept of justice and the fair use of tax dollars and revenues that are paying for these programs. So even though it's essential for the aquatic ecosystem for these projects to take place in the rural areas, it's also essential that some attention be paid to the urban areas because of the people, the opportunity for children to see these waterways, even bringing some waterways back to the point of having some increased aquatic integrity as opposed to some with very low diversity in the fish and so forth. So there are benefits in terms of environmental equity of having projects in urban locations, and yet it's generally not been attended to. So here's an example of what sometimes results when a stream restoration project takes place. Many different entities participate. So they do signage like something like you would see here. Their logos are there, all kind of bragging about their contribution and their role. And yet, unfortunately, these projects can just leave communities confused. For example, is this open to the public or not? Is it open for certain hours? Is fishing allowed? So with more attention to environmental equity, the project promoters could do a better job of making this a welcoming spot for people with all kinds of concerns. And this is an example of the sort of problem that stream restoration is directed towards. So this is a stream that's out of equilibrium with the landscape around it. It's a farm and it seems somewhat natural, but yet what we're seeing is that year after year, the surface has become increasingly impervious. So there's runoff at the time of rainfall. So then the stream is actually acting to erode away at the section that's shown here. And this is the sort of thing that would be stabilized or adjusted in context of restoration. So next I wanted to turn back to the Syracuse area, and this situates central and upstate New York relative to Lake Ontario and Canada to the north. And I wanted to talk about the project that took place in Onondaga Creek. So about 10 years ago, there was an initiative to do watershed restoration. And the first task was to get citizen volunteers to envision what they wanted the creek to be like, what the future could be. So this is a creek running from south to north and discharging into Onondaga Lake, which you've already seen. And the marginalized communities in this particular watershed include Onondaga Nation right there in the center, which is a community of indigenous people who have been continuously living in that location for thousands of years. They have semi-state-like rights in terms of control of their resources and land. And then another marginalized population includes African American people living within the city of Syracuse. So that's the darker gray outline there. And Syracuse is distinguished, unfortunately, by having one of the highest levels of residential segregation in the United States, meaning the complete separation of African American and white people residentially. So this is a shot of what the creek looks like in much of the urban area within Syracuse itself. And the planning workshops that were done were focusing and envisioning with community members goals for increasing access, safety, opportunities for engagement for kids, safer fishing. The community engagement process used some participatory mapping concepts, and this is the final product. And this is an example of some of the participatory processes that were being run. So finally, I just wanted to mention a few more places where really innovative things are being done in terms of creative engagements with urban watersheds and concepts of environmental justice. This is a mural that was commissioned in the city of San Diego, and it's depicting a creek that discharges to the bay. Everything has been completely obliterated with channelization and with systems of pipes, but the community there has been in place for thousands of years, and this is a reference to their earlier civilization and the fact that access to the bay that was completely interrupted by the development process is something that provided strong ongoing relationships that supported their food systems and their ceremonies. Another kind of creative engagement is a sound art project that was run in Onondaga Creek, and this was created by the artist Forestry from Florida. So that this sound art involved snippets of residents and especially elders reminiscing about the past of the creek, and then some specific location sounds that were designed to enhance people's experience as they walked through and listened to that. In Los Angeles, California, there was some amazing graffiti that this image shows just a portion of, and it was designed in part for a graffiti competition that was run, and it was about a wetland that was being threatened by development there, and the whole slogan was "Creatures of Justice." So this shows you just one of the 3 frames of the ecosystem there. I'll also mention some of the really political action that's been taking place in some European cities, including Paris. And there's a small movement to reclaim urban bathing, as they call it. So even in places where water quality regulations do not allow swimming and where municipal policies forbid it, there are sets of people who go ahead and do it anyway. And this kind of action is in some ways taunting the authorities and pointing out the fact that they want to reclaim the place for themselves, and they are insisting that water pollution be reversed and that this kind of swimming be made possible by those who are managing these waterways. So in sum, though urban communities are routinely structured out of stream restoration initiatives that focus on the rural areas primarily, and thereby undermine the environmental justice goals, we see that some alternatives do emerge. So, in conclusion, urban stream restoration projects really can help address general obliviousness about the critical nature of water and the need to protect it. And that, in turn, will help to ground watershed values in society more broadly, while simultaneously working towards equity and helping preserve natural systems into the future. And urban stream restoration projects can serve environmental justice goals, but systems of monitoring and evaluation must be in place, and coordination with a governmental body responsible for meeting specific goals and accountable for the outcomes is indispensable. The incentives and logic of construction projects and the siloing of hydrologic elements handed off to engineers who focus exclusively on cubic feet per second continue to undermine the potential of urban streams to be seen as something more. Still, examples have shown how revitalization can happen in ways that increase equity, and landscape architects can help design solutions that inform, inspire, and endure. I'll close with a quote from Cornel West and Roberto Unger. It's not enough to rebel against the lack of justice unless we also rebel against the lack of imagination. Thank you. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for bringing so many good ideas and so many good examples to this webinar. And we are ready to have any questions from the audience, or if there is anything else that Armin you want to add, it would be great that you join us and have a discussion together.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you so much, Sharon, for your amazing presentation. I think some our audiences, they have some questions. I saw just someone raised his hand. Besides, I think we have such kind of discussion in the end of the webinar, yes?
So, but if there's one question or something else that you want to add, it would be fine. But we can continue with Daphne. Probably later, Daphne can join us and have a discussion together.
Thank you. Thank you. So let's see if there is any question here from the audience.
I do see a question from Farzana, and I think she's saying, is Onondaga Creek redesigned or not? And what actually happened as a result of that process is a plan to redesign it. There was a creek walk that was finished, so that is a very low-cost improvement that includes some interesting artistic features too, and opportunities to go all the way to the lake. So it's like passive recreation. But some of the other things that happened weren't officially part of the plan, so there were some new apartment complexes that were revitalized, maybe still going in some direction that could be called gentrification. But there was definitely cleanup, and there are proposals for more costly, more rigorous improvements of the creek.
And Armin is great.
I have a question, Sharon, of course.
We have above 110 attendees. That's great. I never expected so many people attend this. I've thought probably 40, 60 people would attend, and that's great. It's really good to have so many number of people here, and I hope that they can be more engaging.
Thank you. I hope so. I have a question, Sharon. I would like to consider myself as some kind of environmentalist. And I am told always from my friends who are technocrats that what you say about integrating is just a gesture. You cannot address real problems. For example, in cities, big cities with many population, it is not real, it is not practical, what you say. I really want to hear from you. Is it really what we say, is it really not practical?
I think we can make the comparison to engineers trying to eliminate friction. You can never eliminate friction. It's impossible. But yet we try, and there's many, many reasons to try because of efficiency, because of better outcome, and so forth. So I think maybe it's the same with people in urban areas and nature. that it's inevitable that there will be some undermining of natural integrity, but yet at the same time, we're social beings. We can and love to be with each other, to create the built environment that allows us to do all the human things that we do. But this other piece can't be ignored. It has to be a place where we engage creatively and dynamically, even if at the end of the day, you know, it's not complete.
Armin, shall we just continue and have a short break with a short video for 3-4 minutes, and then we have Daphne for the second presentation. Is it okay with you? Sharon, is it okay? Okay.